So what survived the impact? What survived that mass extinction?
Well, either alligators or crocodiles, or maybe both.
It's probably both, I believe.
Yeah. Chickens?
No.
Or chickens came from something.
Like raptors and stuff.
Theropods. Yeah,
theropods.
or avian dinosaurs, rather.
And a bunch of stuff under the sea.
So, yeah, I mean,
and small things, I think.
Smaller things were better at surviving because bigger things need more energy, generally. And so that was harder to find, especially if you had to find it from a bunch of smaller things. And obviously, flowering plants were just super dominant after the dinosaurs' extinction. I'm not entirely sure why, but flowering plants, as in plants that have flowers, this is interesting. People think of flowering plants as that's just plants. Nah. Flowering plants just had this massive boom after that. Apparently all land animals weighing over 25 kilograms died.
That's all of us
Really?
out.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but
Wow.
mammals were pretty solid because they've got fur and they're sort of they can regulate their body temperature. They're not super dependent on the external temperatures for that. So it's actually really interesting. So here's a quote from an expert on this. He says, "What we're left with are basically the seeds of what we have today. Many of the major animal groups that are alive today were in place before the asteroid impact, and they all suffered some level of extinction, but the lines that led to modern animals got through. All of the non-bird dinosaurs died out, but dinosaurs survived as birds. Some types of bird did go extinct, but the lineages that led to modern birds survived." So obviously, after this, you had just a lot of smaller animals, which is really interesting. Just a world of slightly smaller animals, and there were very big birds that survived that were, I think, both predatory and herbivorous, and they died out pretty quickly. Just because it's hard to maintain that level of body mass when there's not that much food. And 15 million years after the sort of non-bird dinosaurs went extinct, this is something called the Oligocene epoch, I think. Oligocene epoch, that's when you start to get the big mammals, like rhino-sized mammals, sort of starting to appear. And before that, for 15 million years, it was mostly small mammals, small sort of bird-like creatures, or avian dinosaurs, and and obviously some kinds of flowering plants and whatnot, and some sea creatures, but you had your mosasaurs die out. I think you had your plesiosaurs. I think the plesiosaurs died out around about there, but you had a lot of sea creatures. I'm not so sure about the megalodon when that went extinct, but I'm not sure, but you had a lot of sea creatures that just went out as well, because you think that the sea is separate from the sort of land and all of that, but bear in mind that there are there are plankton in the water that need to get light from the sky. If there's less light from the sky, the plankton in the water can't get that. If there's no plankton in the water, then you can't have the smaller animals that feed on. You can't have the zooplankton that feed on the sort of what's the word for it? Oh, I can't remember the word. You can't have the zooplankton that feed on the other plankton. So you can't then have the stuff that feed on the zooplankton and the other plankton eating that, and then you can't have the slightly bigger things eating that, which means that you don't have the mosasaurs and whatnot eating their big prey, and you're just screwed.
What about all of the bugs? Because there are these flowering plants. Presumably there's something pollinating these flowering plants, or the flowers wouldn't have stuck around.
Bugs did okay. I think bugs are ancient. Bugs are quite old.
Yeah.
I think the main issue for bugs, now I don't know the timing of this, so I may be wrong, but I'm going to draw from what I've heard elsewhere. I think one of the big issues for bugs is oxygen. Bugs can be basically whatever size if there's a high enough oxygen density, because they're very weird in the way that they're... And we're talking colloquial bugs here, not scientific bugs. Insects generally, right? They operate in that they've got kind of essentially these tubes going into them, rather than sort of breathing through lungs. They just have tubes that go into parts of their body, and if there's not a high enough oxygen density, then the oxygen can't penetrate deep enough for them to be big enough, for them to be bigger. So the higher the oxygen density, the bigger bugs can be. Bugs, I think, generally went fine. Bugs are bugs. They're bloody hardy. Yeah. So I think flowering plants. I don't know when flowering plants and bugs started to use each other in the way that they use each other now for pollination and food. I'm not sure. I mean, I'll look into that. This is the stuff that I find incredibly interesting, but there's so much. So much.
I'm sure it is.
I mean, I would recommend PBS Eons. Really great for all of this sort of stuff. Really, really good. Kurtzkazag's got a few good things on it as well. But PBS Eons is just mad solid for just good little sort of tidbits and bite-sized pieces about this. So that's what survived, I guess. But why don't we talk about briefly how, or why rather, the birds survived? So why do you reckon the birds survived?
Oh, because they can move around.
Really? That's interesting. That's not a bad idea.
They can move somewhere warm, and they can move, like, they're much quicker.
Right.
So it's actually it's not actually flight, that sort of thing that gave them the advantage. Apparently it's food, which I kind of alluded to earlier. So if these birds were sort of moving towards toothless beaks and feathers and all of that sort of stuff, right? And a part of this sort of evolutionary move was a more varied diet. And as I was saying earlier, if you have a more varied diet, then you are more likely to survive an event like this because okay, so for example, if an anteater if there was an extinction event of ants, the anteater would be screwed. Obviously, ants do so much for so many different parts of our food web. Like, it would be catastrophic if ants were to disappear. But the anteater is out immediately, just out.
Yeah.
Other animals that eat ants but also eat other things could be fine. They could rely more heavily on another food source, but then that would dwindle. But then hopefully they would fill a niche of the ants. Food webs are complicated. Food webs are one of those things where you think, aha, I take this out, and it will... No. Any calculation or estimation you make on a food web is wrong.
Yeah.
I can promise you that.
It's like a Jenga tower. You just all fall down.
It's incredibly complex. So they changed their sort of skull shape and lost their teeth, and the tissues on their faces sort of changed as they started to eat more fruits and seeds and other plants. And I think they were also sort of having insects and other small things. You know, birds have that diet today, but because they were moving towards more fruits and seeds and other plant foods, they were probably more able to sort of survive that mass extinction. Because while a bunch of plants did die out, some survived, and if you're able to eat those, that's honestly probably a better source of energy rather than having to rely on it's another step in the process, right? So if you're a fox, you eat, say, a rabbit, right? Now a rabbit can just eat whatever is growing in the ground. A fox has to make sure that there is enough food to sustain the rabbits so that there are enough rabbits to sustain the fox, right? So there's just that extra step, which makes it that slight bit harder potentially. So, yeah, I mean, these apparently, so according to Ryan Felice, he is an anatomist at UCL. Very, very smart person, clearly. He has said all the things that make birds birds were already in place well before the mass extinction. So when the extinction hit, obviously birds had been developing all of these different sort of adaptations for a while, and it clearly gave them that edge that let them survive. So not necessarily flight, but probably more just the versatility of birds. Because, you know, I mean, if you think about birds, they can be quite versatile in their diets and in their sort of niches. I mean, think of Darwin's finches, right? They that's like the sort of quintessential idea of different birds developing different beaks for different niches. But also, you've got some birds that are highly specialized and other birds that can be slightly more varied. I mean, you could see the same across the animal kingdom, but birds are quite good, you know, in that respect, because they've got their feathers for their warmth, they can fly and move around to different places, as you said, Luke, and they can eat nuts, seeds, insects, bunch of different things. And so it just gave them that edge that made them sort of essentially just manage to survive longer than the non-avian dinosaurs. I think it says here, particularly when sort of animals started to die out, other animals started to die out a lot, beaked birds were able to eat seeds and a lot more efficiently than other animals. And so that basically let them last until the vegetation started coming back. And obviously, beaks aren't just the only thing that gave them the edge. There are so many reasons. If you try to pin it down to one thing, you're just getting it wrong. It's so complex.
Yeah.
But that is roughly why the birds may have survived, because they have beaks and they're able to digest and break down seeds, which, you know, if you think about it, we think about pumpkin seeds and other kinds of seeds like that. But a lot of seeds don't want you to eat. I mean, all seeds don't want you to eat them, basically, right? You know, seeds don't want to be destroyed.
Yeah.
And so they're tough on the outside, and we eat the ones that are easy to eat, but there are other seeds that are harder to eat, and these birds were clearly able to get into them, which gave them that edge. Mammals obviously had the edge of being warm-blooded and not so reliant on the external temperature as maybe other sort of creatures at the time were. Also, they could burrow and were smaller as well, which was a big help. So they survived. Birds survived. Crocodiles are just goods. What they do, those guys just they will kill anything. They are very good at what they do. I am almost entirely terrified of crocodiles and alligators and anything. Not in a. Oh my god, I don't want to near one. I know what you can do, and I'm not gonna push you.
I'm not gonna mess with it.
Yeah, like I'm not gonna mess with a hippo. You know.
Yeah.
Like I value my life enough to not do that. You know, I recognize how good they are at killing.